Yejide Orunmila is with the African National Women's Organization. It's an international organization founded by the African People's Socialist Party in March 2015 to address the specific oppression that African women face as a result of colonial domination. Under her leadership, IWA has built branches and established membership in the United States, Africa, and Europe. IWA has been organizing against the state-sponsored kidnapping of African children and the criminalization of African parents through its campaign, Arrest CPS. Black women and their relationship to the prison system as prisoners and as supporters of incarcerated persons, etc. So let's hear from Yejide. Thank you so much.
I'm going to greet you with the word that we say in our movement all the time, which is uhuru, and it's a Swahili word that means freedom. So I'm going to say it, and I'm going to ask you to say it back to me. Uhuru. Uhuru. I have a PowerPoint presentation. I apologize to the interpreters because I will go off script a little bit, and I've just been so inspired by the panelists and the conversation so far that some of the things haven't been captured in my presentation. So I just first want to say that the African National Women's Organization was born from the African Revolution. And this is an objective of the African People's Socialist Party in the US and beyond is to make the African Revolution point blank imperial. There is no compromise with imperialism. There is no negotiation with colonialism. And we recognize that in the United States, African people are domestically colonized. This is the same for African people all over the world, in particular on the continent of Africa, where we have African figureheads, but we already know who is pulling the strings. So my presentation is going to talk about the general work of giving a history of our development as African people, and then I will talk about Arrest CPS. And some of things that may not specifically be in the slides. So I'm so sorry to my interpreters. So the essential struggle for African working class women, and this is a picture of my IEC, is International Executive Committee. And our organization is rooted in African working class and poor peasantry. And in every case that we have, our campaigns represent this class of women. Next slide. So our beginning, just for context, is although slavery is not the beginning for African people, it is the point in our history where the self-productive self-determination of African people shifted away from developing on our own, by our own self for our own people, to now shifting toward developing and producing for the colonizers. So Marx called it primitive accumulation, right? And we in the African National Women's Organization utilize a theory called African internationalism, which basically says that would capitalism exist were it not for the kidnapping of African people, hundreds of years of free labor, the vision and dispersal of African people around the world to fulfill this need? And our answer to that is no. The attack on Africa continues today. It has not stopped. And colonialism has not ended. So African internationalism helps us understand what the objectives are. It says colonialism is the problem. And when we know that colonialism is the problem, the oppressive military state on African people, then that's a starting point for us to overturn our relationship to colonialism. We can then see the institutions of colonialism and fight against those things. It's hard to do that when we're talking about racism, which the ideas in white people's heads, or some other kind of intangible thing that is based on whatever white person or whatever colonizer that you experience at any given time. And colonialism is a power dynamic. So if we want to dismantle oppression over us, we have to attack the power dynamic, not the thoughts and ideas in any individual's head. Next slide. So the main points of African internationalism is that capitalism is inherently parasitic. It was not born as a progressive feature. We know that Marx determined that that capitalism was progressive, and as African people, it can't be. We recognize that our enslavement was the underpinning, the foundation of a worldwide system of capitalism. That hundreds of years of free labor, of forced labor, the expropriation of African resources had shifted us away from our own self-determination cannot be seen as a progressive moment in history. It is an actual parasitism. Because of that, because you know what a parasite is, it feeds off of you, and when you are having a parasitic relationship, you become sick while the parasite becomes stronger because it's sucking your blood. This is the relationship that we have to colonization. The only legitimate leadership of the struggle against world capitalism is the workers and toiling masses of the oppressed nations. The liberation of our people is not going to be rooted in the petty bourgeoisie. It's not going to be rooted in the interest of the petty bourgeoisie. It's rooted in the interest in solving the problems of the masses. The people who are poor, the people who are deeply and directly impacted constantly by this, and they're the most motivated to change. That's why we see that in national liberation struggles, it's the poor peasantry and the working class that are engaged in these struggles because they are deeply impacted by the way things are that allows them to be oppressed. And then colonialism is a mode of production. Colonialism, the attack, the cardoning off, the creation of borders, all of this was used as a way to extract resources, extract people, and use all of these things to enhance or make wealthy Europe and now the rest of the world. Next slide. So the feudal slavery is directly tied to the industrialization of Europe, right? So here we have hundreds of years of enslaved people in the so-called Americas, and we also have a deep colonization of Africa and attack of Africa, and all of the resources and the labors that were gained from that was able to fund the worker, like raw material to Europe, and allow for workers to come off the land because now we have these alternatives, right? We have these factories that people can work in. So we have African women at the bottom, and it doesn't matter where. There were enslaved African women who were working in the fields, and then we also have, this is the picture next to it, is an African woman who was sitting in a depiction of an African woman who was being examined by Marion Sims. Marion Sims is supposed to be the father of gynecology, and he became the father of gynecology by doing inhumane experimentation on African women. And his basis for doing these things without anesthesia and all these things, that African women had a higher tolerance for pain. So he basically tortured African women and became the father of gynecology. And you'll see this a lot in colonial definitions of the people who are supposed to be like the founders of things, that they primarily became what they are by exploitation and oppression. And also African women produced labor. Like we were the factories, human factories, for the labor force for the United States or America at the time, and then Europe and on the continent of Africa. So these, our bodies, in addition to our productive forces, our labor in itself, were twofold. Like we had to produce workers to work the land. Our children became capital. In the US, when plantation owners could not afford to pay the bank, they would use African children as capital. They would say, here is a black child. When they become older, they become your worker. So they'll use that as leverage. And then, and of course, the products of all of the labor, our human labor, our human children, and our fundamental labor became two elements that made Europe wealthy. Next slide. In addition to the goings of the rest of the world, because it didn't just stop with Africa. We are currently hearing in this conference that they use this as a mode of production in different places around the world. So here we have Cecil Rhodes, who was a businessman who said that from the Cape to, I believe it was the coast of Africa up there, that he was going to control, the transportation of goods from both places. And his goal was to produce like a train line to make that happen. So, but one of the things that we learned in school in particular is that slavery was first outlawed by Britain. Right? Britain started like in 1830 saying that it's going to outlaw international trade of African human beings. But at the same time, what they were doing is enhancing their attack on the African continent. So from a period of 1840 to 1965, Europeans went about dividing Africa, taking all of the resources and making themselves wealthy. And the Caribbean as well, because these African people are there too, and so on and so forth. So they defined and outlawed the trade because that was a political move to prevent the other places from, getting resources, getting money from the use of Africans. Now they had the whole continent. The United States was locked out of that. Now they had the whole continent of Africa. They didn't have to transport Africans across the sea. They are now using the entire continent of Africa to fuel their industry. And so the Berlin Conference was a conference that was used to subdivide Africa. And so we'll see the emergence of colonies after that. And then African labor still today represents a large portion of the wealth that Europe and United States and Canada and China and all these other imperialists benefit from in Africa. I also want to say when it comes to war, we talk about the wars that we see, but in Africa, the wars are so clandestine, right? We see the conflict in Sudan. We see the constant ongoing conflict in the Congo that never goes away, ever. There's always something year after year. Millions of African people wiped off the planet because of these wars. And the underpinning of that is U.S. imperialism, French imperialism, British imperialism, because they're still trying to control, or they still are controlling all of the resources, and know that the resources from Africa, which can benefit the entire world, they want to have control over that and have hegemony over the resources that come out of it. So when we talk about colonialism in our movement, we don't talk about this as being something that is in the past. In the United States, I talk about Africa a lot. We say we're domestically colonized, but what we see internationally is that there's a high use of war and military and all of these things in our communities. We also see the police. We also see African women tied up in the state. So the Arrest CPS campaign that we have is about stopping. CPS is an acronym for Child Protective Services, which is held by the state. And the idea is that they're supposed to go in and rescue children who are being abused and neglected. However, even though Black children, African children represent 13% of the entire U.S. population, they represent nearly 33% of all children in care of foster. Even in states where they represent a minuscule amount, their total in the family policing system is overrepresented. What does that tell us? That the attack that is happening on African communities is an attack that keeps the working class involved in the struggle, involved in crises. So when you see that the family is being attacked, now these mothers who could otherwise think about ending the colonial mode of production are now entrenched in a battle, a silent battle with the state. Okay. And then the next slide. So how it impacts us, I'm going to go a little over slide, please forgive me. So African people experience identity crisis. So when I say I'm African, it might raise some eyebrows because I was born in the U.S. I was not born in Africa. My family, my mother and my father were born in the Caribbean. But we recognize that African people are a dispersed African nation, and our responsibility is to fight for Africa and fight for African communities. So our identity is entrenched in the African woman as opposed to being an African American or a Jamaican or a Canadian or a Nigerian or anything like that. And our analysis goes beyond that. And then there's a difference in ideological development. So while other places might be ideologically advanced, we have other places who are still struggling around ideology. And so we have to have a rapid development of ideological pace of African women. And then the struggles are compartmentalized. You know, some struggles are about racism, some struggles are about bad, corrupt leaders or other things like that. These are all challenges that, you know, we're working with. Next slide. So 3 issue areas for us have been violence. Violence could be direct violence from the police or the military. African women as part of the African nation experience violence at higher rates. So Black men, African men experience violence, but if we're African women inside the nation, like we are experiencing violence at higher rates from the police and from inside the colonies. We have economics. African women as a labor force are still responsible for producing workers, but also producing for capitalist consumption. And then health. African women globally, doesn't matter where we are, doesn't matter our social and economic status, still experience the highest rates of infant and maternal death. And in the U.S., we receive subpar level of health care, and I would imagine this in other places as well. We are a casualty of gender-specific cancers, and most likely to develop fibroids. These are just some of the things that I'm touching on, but that we start to recognize that colonialism has also an internal impact on us as well. Next slide. So I'm going to speed through these. So what we've done in our movement is organize skilled workers. This is Dr. Aisha Fields, who's in Sierra Leone, organizing with some community members around developing healthy water, rainwater harvesting, and other sort of treatments of water that was in the community and poisoning the community. Next slide. And then here we are also, we also engage in, you know, programs here in the United States, and we had a doula program. And doula, of course, is a person that helps to, you know, assist mothers when they have children, and that's also directly tied to the infant and maternal crisis. Next slide. Our second issue area is political activism and agitation. Next slide. Next slide. Our goal is to fight against the contradiction. I guess the picture didn't load, but our goal is to fight against contradiction, APAC, REMPAC, foster adoption, attacks against birth and reproductive rights, and more requires the voices and bodies of those impacted. If we, as people who live under colonialism and capitalism, just go to work every day and allow the oppressor to use our bodies and our minds for that, and we don't counteract that by engaging in struggles to free ourselves, then, you know, we're doing like, so our responsibility as African National Women's Organization is to organize the African working class to confront these issues. Next slide. And then we also are about creating liberated territories, which is not loading, but it's okay. Next slide. So key economic characteristics are, we are preparing to govern. We don't see any confidence. We don't have any confidence in the U.S. imperialist system or any imperialism that would allow for us to have equality and freedom as women, let alone people, underneath this. So our goal is to create systems and processes where we can actually replace the colonizers. Not as the colonizers ourselves, but as people who are working for a socialist future. And then dual-link contending power, which is, you know, replacing institutions of the colonizer so that we can provide socialist solutions for our people. And then we have acts of self-determination, which includes, this is a video of our headquarters in St. Louis. I don't have time to go into the situation on the ground in St. Louis, Missouri, but it's devastating to see the African community be divested. And so we're reclaiming property and creating liberated territories on the north side of St. Louis. Next slide. which is an E-Africa. So Izweletu is I want to say occupied Azania, which people call South Africa. This is Africa is our land is Africa. So even though Africa may not be your land, I'm going to say it with the Izweletu, you say E-Africa. Izweletu, E-Africa. Reverse it. E-Africa, Izweletu.
It's fabulous to learn about these hopeful struggles going on right in the belly of the beast and beyond.